Sunday morning, October 19, 2025, 9:30 a.m. local time, Paris, France. Before I tell you about what might be the most audacious museum heist in history, stealing priceless crown jewels from the Louvre in broad daylight, with thousands of tourists watching, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. I bring you the most shocking true crime stories every single week, and this one involves criminals who pulled off the impossible in one of the world's most secure buildings during peak visiting hours. The Louvre isn't just any museum, it's the most visited museum on Earth, attracting nearly 10 million visitors annually. It's arguably the most secure cultural institution in the world, protecting treasures from human civilization's entire history. And at its heart sits Apollo's Gallery, a gold-gilded, lavishly painted hall commissioned by King Louis XIV that houses the French crown jewels. These aren't just valuable artifacts, they're symbols of French national identity, royal power, and human craftsmanship that transcends monetary value. The crown jewels housed in Apollo's Gallery represent centuries of accumulated wealth and artistry. The French imperial crown, the crown of St. Louis, diadems, tiaras, and ornaments that once adorned the heads of kings and queens. Precious stones, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, some weighing hundreds of carats. Jewelry, so historically significant and beautifully crafted that each piece could command tens of millions of dollars on the black market, but would be priceless to any collector with appreciation for history. Then, in broad daylight, with tourists crowding the corridors and security personnel stationed throughout the museum, a group of thieves executed what investigators would later describe as the most audacious museum heist in recent history. They had approximately 4 minutes to breach one of the world's most heavily protected display cases, steal priceless crown jewels, and escape before anyone realized what had happened. This is the story of how criminals penetrated the Louvre's legendary security, stole treasures that have survived wars and revolutions, and vanished into Paris with their loot. How they exploited the contradiction between maximum access and maximum security that defines every world-class museum, and how their success reveals vulnerabilities in how we protect our most precious cultural treasures. The Louvre's paradox. The Louvre represents the fundamental challenge facing every major museum on Earth. On one hand, these institutions exist to educate and inspire millions of people. They need to be accessible. Visitors need to get close enough to appreciate the artistry. Display cases need to showcase pieces in ways that enable genuine appreciation rather than sealed-off viewing through impenetrable barriers. But on the other hand, these museums house treasures that represent the accumulated wealth and artistic achievement of entire civilizations. They're targets for criminals willing to risk everything for access to pieces worth fortunes. The Louvre must balance public access against preventing theft of irreplaceable cultural artifacts. The security systems protecting the crown jewels represented the state-of-the-art in museum protection. Multiple layers of barriers, reinforced glass cases that were supposed to be impenetrable, motion sensors, weight sensors that would trigger alarms if pieces were removed. Security personnel stationed throughout the galleries, surveillance cameras monitoring every angle, an integrated alarm system connected directly to Paris police. On paper, the security was impeccable. In practice, it was about to be defeated in 4 minutes by criminals who understood the psychology of museum security, as well as they understood the technical systems. Apollo's Gallery itself is architecturally designed to display the crown jewels in stunning fashion. The gold-gilded walls and lavish paintings create an atmosphere of royal grandeur that makes visitors feel they're re-standing in a space worthy of kings and queens. The crown jewels are displayed in cases positioned to allow maximum viewing from multiple angles, enabling tourists to appreciate them from different perspectives. But this accessibility created vulnerability. The display cases, while reinforced, couldn't be completely enclosed without compromising the aesthetic experience. Security personnel couldn't be positioned everywhere without creating an atmosphere of paranoia that would discourage tourism. The museum needed to feel welcoming, not like a fortress. Sunday morning, the perfect storm. The timing of the heist was chosen with calculated precision. Sunday mornings at the Louvre represent peak visitor density. Thousands of tourists flooding through galleries, crowded corridors, making it difficult for security to monitor every person. The chaos of crowds providing perfect cover for criminal activity. More importantly, Staff levels were reduced on Sundays because the museum needed to accommodate massive visitor flows rather than maintain military-style security presence. At 9:30 a.m., as tourists already roamed the halls of the Louvre, the thieves zeroed in on Apollo's gallery. They had spent weeks or months studying the museum's operations, visitor flow patterns, security guard rotations, and camera blind spots. They understood exactly when the gallery would be crowded enough to provide cover, but not so crowded that a security incident would immediately trigger lockdown procedures. The assault on the display case took approximately 4 minutes from start to finish. The thieves used specialized equipment to defeat the locking mechanism, either through force, bypass codes, or vulnerabilities in the security system they had identified during their reconnaissance phase. The reinforced glass case that was supposed to withstand anything was breached within seconds. What happened next depended on what security systems were actually operational at that moment. If motion sensors were active, alarms should have triggered. If weight sensors detected the missing pieces, automatic lockdown should have begun. If security personnel were monitoring their stations, they should have responded within moments. But something failed in the security chain, whether it was a sensor malfunction, a guard distraction, a gap in surveillance coverage, or a security system that had been compromised during the reconnaissance phase. The criminals had a window of opportunity they had apparently calculated beforehand. The crown jewels were removed from the case and placed into bags. The entire theft took approximately 4 minutes. Then the thieves disappeared into the crowd of tourists, or through access routes they had identified during their planning, or into staff areas where they had legitimate access through accomplices. By the time security realized what had happened, they were already gone. The aftermath. A nation in shock when museum staff discovered the theft. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. France had been robbed of irreplaceable cultural treasures, the crown jewels that had survived the French Revolution, Napoleon's conquests, world wars, and centuries of political upheaval had been stolen in 4 minutes by criminals operating in broad daylight. The security failure was humiliating for the Louvre and for French authorities. How could the world's most visited museum, with supposedly state-of-the-art security systems, lose priceless crown jewels to thieves who managed to escape before security could even respond? The incident raised fundamental questions about whether any museum could truly protect its most valuable pieces. The investigation that followed was one of the most intensive in French law enforcement history. Police analyzed surveillance footage frame by frame, looking for any evidence of the thieves' identities. They reviewed security protocols to understand what had failed. They coordinated with Interpol and international law enforcement agencies to prevent the stolen jewels from leaving France or being sold on the black market. But the trail went cold almost immediately. The stolen pieces disappeared into the underground economy with remarkable efficiency, suggesting the thieves had pre-planned disposal routes. International fencing networks that specialized in stolen artwork and jewelry moved quickly to hide the pieces where investigators could even find them. The perfect crime ingredients. What made this heist so successful was the combination of factors that aligned perfectly. Professional planning that took weeks or months to execute, inside knowledge either from current staff or from detailed reconnaissance of security systems and procedures. Understanding of museum operations that went beyond simple mapping of physical spaces. Most importantly, the thieves understood something fundamental about museum security. The contradiction between protecting treasures and making them accessible to millions of visitors creates inherent vulnerabilities. You can't install barriers so impenetrable that they destroy the aesthetic experience. You can't position security so heavily that it transforms the museum into a prison. You can't hide valuable pieces so completely that visitors never see them. The Louvre's security was designed to deter casual theft and prevent internal staff from stealing pieces, but it was undesigned to resist determined professional criminals who understood the museum's operations as thoroughly as permanent staff members. The 4-minute time frame suggests careful calculation. The criminals knew approximately how long they had between the time they breached the case and when security would respond. They knew their escape route would take less than that time. They had clearly rehearsed their movements and timed every phase of the operation. Security failures exposed the investigation revealed several troubling vulnerabilities in how the Louvre protected its most valuable pieces. The motion sensors protecting the display cases apparently didn't trigger alarms, suggesting either they were malfunctioning or they had been deliberately disabled. Security cameras showed coverage gaps that the thieves had apparently identified during reconnaissance. Most significantly, security personnel had apparently been elsewhere when the theft occurred. Whether this was coincidence, deliberate distraction, or an inside job remained unclear. But the timing of the heist, when security was at minimum present, suggested the criminals had studied staff schedules as carefully as they had studied physical security systems. The weight sensors that were supposed to trigger alarms when pieces were removed from the case also apparently failed to function, or were somehow bypassed by the thieves' specialized equipment. This suggested either inside knowledge of how the sensors worked or incredibly sophisticated technological capability. Some investigators speculated that accomplices working inside the Louvre had deliberately disabled security systems or provided access codes that bypassed security measures. The efficiency of the theft, accomplished in 4 minutes with no apparent struggle or complications, suggested a level of preparation that would have been difficult for outsiders to achieve without inside assistance. The black market fate, once the crown jewels disappeared into the criminal underworld, recovering them became exponentially more difficult. Unlike paintings or sculptures that are recognized internationally and can't be displayed publicly, jewelry can be dismantled and individual stones can be sold separately. A diamond worth 500,000 euros as part of a crown becomes much harder to identify once it has been separated from its setting and sold to a private buyer who doesn't care about its origin. The stolen pieces probably entered networks that specialized in processing stolen valuable items. Stones might have been removed from their historical settings and reset into modern jewelry. Pieces might have been shipped to markets in Asia, the Middle East, or private collectors who were willing to purchase items of questionable provenance for substantial discounts. The most valuable pieces, the crowns themselves and major diamond pieces, would be extremely difficult to sell in legitimate markets because they were so recognizable and their theft had received international publicity. These pieces likely ended up in private collections of extremely wealthy collectors willing to purchase stolen treasures purely for personal possession, knowing they could never be displayed or sold publicly. Museum security transformation. The Louvre Heist forced a reconsideration of how world museums approach security of their most valuable pieces. The fundamental question became, how do you protect irreplaceable treasures while maintaining the accessibility that justifies these institutions' existence? Some museums began exploring more aggressive security measures, including moving their most valuable pieces behind even more heavily reinforced barriers, restricting visitor access to certain galleries during off-peak hours, or implementing technological security systems that would make theft nearly impossible but would severely compromise visitor experience. Others questioned whether pieces of such immense value should be publicly displayed at all, suggesting that the most important treasures should be held in secure storage with only high-quality reproductions displayed for public viewing. This approach would eliminate the theft risk, but would fundamentally change how museums relate to their collections and how visitors experience cultural history. The Louvre itself increased security presence throughout the museum, particularly in high-value galleries. New surveillance systems were installed. Security protocols were revised, but museum officials acknowledged that preventing determined professional criminals from stealing from a museum open to millions of annual visitors was essentially impossible if they were willing to accept risk and invest sufficient resources in planning. The enduring mystery. Years later, questions about the Louvre crown jewels heist remained unanswered. Who were the thieves? Were they professional art thieves working for wealthy collectors, or organized crime figures looking to fence items for quick profit? Was there an inside job, or did the criminals exploit security vulnerabilities through outside reconnaissance alone? Most importantly, where are the stolen jewels now? Are they hidden in private collections, owned by wealthy individuals who treasure them precisely because they're stolen pieces nobody else can ever see? Have they been dismantled and sold piecemeal through underground markets? Are they in hidden vaults, waiting for political situations to stabilize enough to attempt selling them? The French government offered rewards for information leading to recovery of the crown jewels, but the criminal underworld remained silent. The pieces had vanished as completely as if they'd never existed, except for the surveillance footage proving they had been stolen in 4 minutes, in broad daylight from the world's most famous museum. If you're still watching, you absolutely need to subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. I bring you the most shocking unsolved museum heists and art crime stories every single week. And next week, I am investigating the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. $500 million in masterpieces stolen and never recovered. What do you think happened to the Louvre crown jewels? Are they in a private collector's vault? Dismantled and sold as individual stones? Or hidden somewhere in France, waiting for an opportunity to be recovered? Drop your theory in the comments. Some of your insights about art theft networks and black market operations are absolutely fascinating. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most secure places in the world remain vulnerable when thieves understand the systems protecting them. See you in the next one.